The foundation of the world of Berserk is based upon the esoteric concept of egregores. An egregore is, in this context, essentially an idea or belief that is given form and power by a strong spiritual current generated by the collective unconscious. In other words, egregores are the imagination of man made manifest. The entirety of the astral plane is molded by this concept, and the magic and monsters of Berserk, which derive from it, are powered by its principle. The odd, which is the life force implied by witches to cast spells, is also known as spiritual magnetism. Another way to interpret the esoteric foundations of the world of Berserk is to look at it through Plato's theory of forms, which posits that the physical world is shaped by, or rather, merely attempts to imitate ideas, which are the essence of all things. There are three realms within the world of Berserk. The ideal world, which is where the ideas exist in their pure, ethereal forms. The astral plane, which is where these ideas are given shape. And the physical world, which is the realm of the material, where only the most ideally charged astral beings and forces can manifest themselves. All ideas, beliefs, thoughts, and feelings are inherently energetic, and their supreme culmination is God itself. The idea of evil, the self-proclaimed desired God, was created by the collective unconscious of mankind, and is continually nurtured by it. To be precise, the idea of evil arose from the beliefs of the Holy See, which fused with, and thus were corrupted by the negative feelings, thoughts, and ideas of man in the ideal world. Just as the idea of evil is a corrupted version of God, the members of the God Hand are corrupted angels, and so on. The idea of evil was born out of man's wickedness, and it is a mechanism that ensures the proliferation of evil. Causality works in favor of evil, creating a cycle of ever-expanding darkness that engulfs the world like a plague. To break this cycle requires an indomitable will to resist unjust circumstances, to endure unsurmountable suffering without surrendering to the temptations of the demonic that offer you a way out. The way Berserk portrays evil, or rather, more specifically, Satanism, is particularly interesting. The devil's temptation is Crowleyan in nature. Those who face great agony receive a proposal by the God Hand. If they abandon their humanity, they can receive the power to do what they will. As they ascend to demonhood, they are able to lord over humans, who, to them, become no more than meek vessels of flesh, and indulge in boundless hedonism. The ultimate prize, however, is their soul. They are destined to be sucked by the vortex of souls that feeds the ever-growing idea of evil. While the proposal must be accepted voluntarily, causality brings forth the circumstances that make the demonic temptation alluring in the first place, and the God Hand is free to groom and manipulate its targets. Some apostles still retain a tiny portion of their humanity, which to them becomes a source of weakness. The Count could not muster the strength to sacrifice his beloved's daughter, and his hesitation was the cause of his death. Berserk's narrative centers around this cycle of evil, this path towards darkness that is built by the malice of man. The culmination of the corrupted causality is the rise of the Antichrist, who will build a false paradise on earth and sacrifice the entire world to a false god. That Antichrist is, of course, Griffith. Griffith's sin is the most primordial and dangerous there is: pride. Griffith always desires to reach for the heavens, to have his own heavenly kingdom, which he would rule as a great king. To achieve his dream, he must build a Tower of Babel with the bodies of both follower and enemy, putting himself in front of and above all, abandoning his humanity in the process. In the past, the death of a child was a cause for sorrow and concern for Griffith. Now Griffith displays a sinister smile upon hearing of the death of Adonis, as he was a potential contender for the throne who might have stood in his way and therefore has to be eliminated for the sake of his goal. The sole light within Griffith's dark soul is his brotherly friendship with Guts, the only man who can make him forget his dream. When Griffith lost everything and his ambition became utterly unattainable, he has to make a difficult choice: either sacrifice all of the men who believe in him, along with his one and only friend, Guts, for the sake of his dream, or live miserably as a crippled mockery of his former self and die a tragic death. Griffith chose with his free will to become the Antichrist, though his destiny was orchestrated by causality and he was subtly coerced by the God Hand. Blaming Griffith for accepting the unfair proposal presented to him is almost like blaming a lion for hunting and feeding on its prey. The root of the problem lies in the world governed by a demiurgic god. The Holy See prophesied, for a long time, the coming of a falcon of darkness that would call upon the world an apocalyptic age. Quote, "When the sun will have died 5 times, a red lake will appear at the west of the city with a name both new and ancient, and it will be the sign that the 5th angel is born. The angel shall be a falcon of darkness, both master of the sinful black sheep and king of the blind white sheep, the one who shall bring an age of darkness upon the world." End quote. The sun dying 5 times is, of course, a reference to the eclipse. The city with a name both new and ancient is Midland. The 5th angel, who shall be a falcon of darkness, is Femto. The sinful black sheep are the apostles who serve the falcon, and the blind white sheep are the ignorant men who are his subjects. That prophecy, which forecalls the coming of the Antichrist, was inverted by the holy men of Midland, who received a dream, which they thought to be divine revelation, about a falcon of light who will save the people from every calamity. While Griffith harbors an intense darkness within him, his exterior is perfectly symbolic of purity and light. He superficially represents Christ himself, the Holy Spirit, the white falcon of the Holy See. He is like Lucifer, who is externally perceived as a bringer of light, the son of the dawn, but is, in fact, the prince of darkness. Or rather, the falcon of darkness, Femto. In Griffith's own words, he who bears light exists in the deepest shadow. In sharp contrast to him, Gut superficially represents darkness. He is like Dajjal, the Islamic Antichrist, a man blinded in one eye who bears the mark symbolic of the rejection of God. His interior, however, is the opposite, and his relentless perseverance in the face of struggle can be equated to martyrdom, an act which stands in opposition to the sacrifice of others. Griffith and Guts are to each other like the yin is to the yang. Griffith's plan to become the king of the world necessitated his reincarnation. His journey mirrors that of Christ, and he has to die and reincarnate in human form. For his rebirth to transpire, a great ritual or a strong current of negative thoughts and emotions is summoned, alongside mass death must take place. The ritual was conducted in Albion, a place plagued with the burden of countless deaths by disease, famine, and execution, and it was an epicenter for satanic activity, human sin, and depravity. The ritual culminates in the symbol of the Antichrist, the brand of sacrifice, being drawn by a surge of fire. The body claimed by Griffith is that of the Moonlight Boy, a child that was born from what was almost a satanic inversion of the birth of Jesus Christ. Upon regaining a body, Griffith had to test if he retained a shred of his humanity by meeting his former friend Guts, and he confirmed he did not. He went on to protect Midland from foreign invaders with an army of monstrous knights who obey him out of an inherent duty to serve the Antichrist. His adversary, Ganishka, was a conqueror and demon lord who wanted to rule the world, much like Griffith himself. He said, quote, "I control the vastest territory in the world. I won't relinquish it. Even if it's blood-smeared and defiled, this world belongs to me. I'll reign over this unclean world as a demon king and rebel against God." Ganishka was raised among the Kushan royalty and had to endure various ploys and attempts to assassinate him, for he was a contender for the throne. His own mother tries to poison him, as she favored his younger brother, who he ended up killing in revenge. He also set up the murder of his own father, the king, and usurped his rule. Like Griffith, he struck fear in his opponents and was considered peerless on the battlefield. Ganishka's son made an attempt on his life, just like he has done to his own father in the past. On the brink of death, he activated a Behelit that was given to him by the sorcerer Daiba, and chose to sacrifice his son to ascend to demonhood. With the help of Daiba, who he'd made his general and advisor, he began to produce a vast array of demon soldiers through a man-made Behelit with the aim of establishing a magical empire. The process behind the creation of the Daka, the demon soldiers born out of the man-made Behelit, operates under the same principle behind the birth of the Moonlight Boy. Pregnant women are taken to the man-made Behelit, and as the apostles impart them with their magical seed, the resulting baby turns demonic. Ganishka's plans would be thwarted by his rival, the true, predestined Antichrist, by the one chosen by causality to defeat him. After having suffered a humiliating defeat by Griffith, he enters the man-made Behelit himself to acquire immense power. He absorbed souls to feed himself, culminating in his transformation into a blind, stupid, godlike demon of destruction. His skin becomes wooden, and his body takes the shape of a giant tree, his arms converting into a multitude of tentacles that resemble tree branches. He becomes an embodiment of calamity, the beast that will destroy the reason of the world, that is, bring forth Fantasia. As this demonic tree of calamity, a mindless Ganishka attacks foe and friend alike. Upon seeing the Falcon of Light, he wanders towards his own doom, like a moth to a flame. Such is the will of causality. To face Ganishka and his newborn army of monsters, Griffith orders his demonic troops to transform into their true forms. This causes his human troops to cower in fear and suspect him to be a demon like the ones he leads. Sonia, the messenger of the Antichrist, whose name ironically means wisdom, projects her voice through telepathy and urges them to abandon their doubts, and the ignorant men become blind to the hell they see unfold before them, accepting Griffith as their leader. Beasts and men, wolves and sheep, holy and wicked, they were now hand in hand. Even Daiba is surprised that such blatant deception took hold of the men fighting alongside the demons. The Pope is surprised and filled with a radiant glow. All that was needed to fool mankind was a greater evil to unite everyone under the same banner, a supreme calamity orchestrated by causality that was doomed to be quelled by the Antichrist for all to see. A theatrical act of the devil. Ganishka served as the Leviathan, the foreign invader who came from the sea, and Griffith's troops as the behemoth, the beast who came from the wilderness. In truth, the conflict was empowered by the dragon, by the idea of evil. Griffith climbs on top of Ganishka's head, and is ambushed by the school knight. The knight attacks Griffith with his Behelit sword, only for his swing to be redirected toward Ganishka, tearing an astral fissure so deep that the physical world fuses more profoundly with the astral plane. What was meant to be an axe that defied causality ended up following its current. And so, a vast magical empire is born out of thin air. Falconia, the kingdom of Griffith's dreams, has materialized. Ganishka's body, which was filled with an absurd quantity of souls, was vanquished, and in its place was left a divine tree in the shape of a helix. Fantastical creatures from myth and legend began to terrorize men of all lands, triggering a mass exodus toward Falconia, the only safe haven in the entire world. In the distant past, a mighty conqueror waged an incredible war against the belligerent peoples of his homeland with the aim of creating an empire. Through his horrific campaign, this conqueror subjugated the dozens of factions, became a king, and managed to create the first continental empire in history. Before the birth of this empire, small city-states and tribes waged endless wars against each other, in a period known as the Age of Warlords, a time undoubtedly inspired by Japan's historical Sengoku period. With Gaiseric, in turn, representing the figure of the great unifier, like Oda Nobunaga or Charlemagne. The unification of the various cities and tribes brought unprecedented prosperity, and the people experienced an extraordinary era of peace. This peace festers depravity, however, and the empire and the king who ruled over it fell into immorality. The capital city of the empire, which was named Midland, for it stood in the middle of all the unified nations, became a melting pot of feasting and pleasure, and the king lived in the utmost extravagance, while imposing heavier and heavier taxes on his subjects. As a reaction to such corruption, a wise man founded a religion that preached a strict moral code and denounced the excesses of the powerful. The king ordered this man's abduction. The man was taken to the Tower of Conviction, and there he was tortured to the brink of death. As he endured intense suffering, he prayed and prayed for divine retribution, and so, his desperate desires were finally made manifest. He ascended to angelhood, turning into the first member of the Godhand, Void, and marked all of the people of Midland with the brand of sacrifice, including Gaiseric himself, the king who stood in the face of the first eclipse. By sacrificing Midland, Void acted like the god of the Old Testament when he decided to destroy the world with the flood. No longer believing that Midland could be saved in its current state, Void abandoned his role as Messiah and destroyed it to rebuild it from the ashes under his supervision. From the ritual fueled by intense suffering, mingled with prayers and the deep sense of injustice that cried out for divine intervention, the idea of evil was born, or perhaps corrupted, into existence. This incident occurred through an inversion of the Christian idea that suffering sanctifies. The pain and anguish Void endured ended up corrupting him, and he lost sight of the kingdom of heaven. In his weakness, he chose to strive for the creation of a false paradise on earth, so that, in the material world, all could be freed from suffering. And for that end, the means no longer mattered. Void, like Griffith, was originally shaped through the Christ archetype, a leader with a pure heart, seeking the greater good and martyring himself for his cause, but both fell, and the world broke them, and they gave in to ego and desire, becoming Antichrists. Together with 4 other angels, who interestingly parallel as their inversions the 4 kings of the world of pagan belief, who are said to be great beings who love and protect humanity, and are portrayed as angel-like as they appear in chapter 210, The wise men waged war against a corrupt empire. It is worth noting that the number 4 represents the 4 corners of the material world, which, according to the symbolism of sacred geometry, is like a square or a cube, and the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. The number also represents the 4 elements, fire, water, earth, and air. In other words, the 4 angels, who are based on pagan deities, are the kings of the material world, each embodying a natural element and ruling over one of the 4 corners. In this distant past, mankind had not yet abandoned pagan belief and had an affinity with magic. The vast empire of Gaiseric was a magical one. Both Griffith and Ganishka exist as parallels to him. The 3 of them dreamed of conquering the world and becoming rulers of magical empires. Despite Midland's efforts, the wise man won the war, and Gaiseric only managed to escape as a wandering spirit. His physical body was no more. From that point on, he became a vagabond like Guts. Gaiseric mirrored Griffith, as directly noted by Guts when the princess told his story, but later came to mirror Guts himself, a suffering warrior seeking vengeance against an archdemon. As a result of the war, the followers of the wise man made a deal with the ruined empire. They founded the Church of the Holy See, a force that would rule alongside the king. The Tower of Rebirth is symbolic of this event, as it represents the abandonment of the depravity of yore as condemned by the Church, and the revival of the empire, which now follows the guidance of the Holy See. The Holy See orders the persecution of all remaining sorcerers and witches, for their magical ways were declared heretical. Though magic is, and was extensively used for evil, the Holy See also has the occult motive of eliminating the most dangerous threat against itself. What was once a set of just and moral beliefs preached by a wise man as a way of denouncing the excesses and depravity of an empire now had become a tool for a satanic plot, which aims to produce the Antichrist and call upon his false paradise on earth. The ideology of the church had been partially corrupted, as the wise man who first preached it was himself warped by his suffering. Void is behind the creation of the Behelits. His ambition is to bring forth the Antichrist and create a paradise in the earthly world, and the demonic subjects of the God-hand, which is led by Void, are called apostles. As suggested in a scene during the eclipse invoked by Griffith, Behelits originate from ideas and emotions of suffering, like the souls of those sacrificed in the ritual, which explains their tortured appearance. The idea of evil reveals that Behelits are droplets of ideas spilled from the sea into eternity, invocations for the other world. More on this later. The tower where the wise man was held captive and tortured in became known as the Tower of Conviction, for it was there that his conviction was tested, deepened, and manifested. It was there that it was twisted as well. The name of this saint, the man who became void, was Albion, a name that means white, or pure, in direct contrast to his demonic name, which means void, that is, the purest darkness. The city where his conviction was tested was renamed in his honor. Now that I have covered the events that happened in the past and present of the story, I will proceed to speculate on how I believe it will end. At the current moment, Griffith's dream is nearly fulfilled. He has founded Falconia, a magical empire which he rules as the Antichrist. After the Golden Age arc, the story has mostly been about his ascension, and we have just reached the climactic heights of Griffith's journey. But he is fated to lose. Despite having causality on his side, the indomitable human spirit will triumph over the forces of evil. The satanic sacrifice of others for one's own sake can be countered by sacrificing yourself for the sake of others, and the temptation to surrender your soul and being to evil can be countered by persevering against all odds. Guts managed to escape his predestined fate and trick causality by bashing on, despite the tremendous difficulties. Thus, Guts has the means to oppose and overcome Griffith, for he is human and has friends who love him. Besides the storytelling aspects that supports an eventual defeat of Griffith, the plot has planted the seeds for such a scenario to make sense. The 3 major clues as to how it will unfold are the Dragon's Lair, the Moonlight Boy, and the Rose Tree. Guts' sword, the Dragon's Lair, has been infused with the malice of the thousands of beings it has slain. A shadow coils about it. The sword becomes increasingly magical as it slays more and more astral creatures. The Moonlight Boy is the result of Guts' seed, which, within Casca, was tempered by Femto. Aribis, the union of opposites, Guts and Casca, empowered by the dragon, who in this case is Femto. He is a special being who can only manifest during the full moon, and at other times serves as Griffith's vassal. The Worlds Tree represents the archetypal divine tree of various faiths and mythologies. It is an immensely powerful egregore, for it is and has been fermented by many peoples of the world throughout history. It has the property of merging the physical world with the astral plane, plunging the entire planet into an interstice. Griffith's plan involves the release of the Worlds Tree, with his reincarnation having been the first step to connecting the two realms. He proceeded by burning the Spirit Trees, which absorbs the energy of the Worlds Tree like parasites, stemming its growth. And lastly, Causality arranged the birth and destruction of the calamitous demonic tree, who Ganishka transformed into, and his body gave rise to the Worlds Tree. What the synthesis of these three factors indicates is that Griffith could be defeated by Guts' now special sword, while possessing the Moonlight Boy. The scene where Rickard slaps Griffith's cheek is more than it appears at first glance. It potentially serves as foreshadowing for Griffith's demise at Guts' hands. Griffith's fall may be the result of a climactic duel between him and Guts, between the Falcon of Light and the Beast of Darkness. It is possible that this epic duel will take place at the climax of a magical war threatening the existence of Falconia, much like the magical war that destroyed Gaiseric's empire 1,000 years earlier. After Griffith is defeated, he will sacrifice the only thing he has left, his own kingdom, for his self-preservation, invoking one last eclipse. This is the logical conclusion of Griffith's Faustian bargain, which will lead to his misery. Just as Void's great sacrifice of Midland in the past, and as happens during the 5th eclipse, Griffith will surrender his people for his own sake. The apostles that, until then, were coexisting with regular men will finally unleash their hunger, their desires, upon the sacrificed masses. The God Hand will once more try to claim Casca's and Guts' souls, which should not have been spared from the previous ritual. The other 4 members of the God Hand and their apostles will be faced by the Skull Knight, who will focus on Void, his ancient rival, along with the members of Guts' party, the forces of a united Kushan Empire, and later, with deserters of Falconia's army who decided to combat the demons. This event too mirrors the unfolding of the previous unholy war to an extent, with the 4 great angels that fought side to side with Void, the wise man, having been felled by warriors and magicians. In the case of the previous war, the pagans fought against negative manifestations of the deities they themselves worshipped, and in the case of the future war, the followers of the Holy See will face demonic angels, negative manifestations of the entities they idolize. During the eclipse, Guts will nearly allow himself to be possessed by the Beast of Darkness, as he fights for his and Casca's life. He may defeat Zodd, who will eagerly come to face him at his best, but there will be too many for him to deal with afterwards anyway. His struggle will prove pointless, and his lover will be taken from his arms once again. But this time, her soul will be assimilated into the hellish vortex of the abyss. The stakes will be the highest they have ever been. As Griffith is restored and mightier than ever, Casca's soul is lost, and Guts barely survives the eclipse. The God Hand and their apostles are hunting the remaining survivors, and the Skull Knight is about to be defeated. But in an act of despair and defiance of fate, Guts will finally use his Behelit and call upon a portal to the depths of the astral plane, and, instead of sacrificing his friends to become a demon, he will jump into the darkness. And there, he will face the source of all evil, its very idea, and pierce it with his swords to free Casca. This act of martyrdom will rupture the chain of souls that fed the now defunct Demiurge, freeing all souls from hell. Guts' soul will be left to wander in the void, as he travels too far. Yet, just as in the Boat Arc, Schierke will bring his soul back through her astral projection in a final struggle against fate, as no magician has ever come back from such places, but Farnese will jump in to help her, and the 2 girls will succeed in rescuing their friend. Griffith, in his final form, will have become more powerful than ever, but as Guts slashed his heart, he will fall for good. However, even Griffith's soul, which was once the brightest sun of all, but one which was eclipsed, and became the most profound shadow, will be redeemed in the end, and thus, Guts' son, the Moonlight Boy, will be freed from his influence. He will no longer be possessed by the Antichrist, and will now exist only as himself. The Dragon's Lair was originally forged as an affront. It is too big to be called a sword. Massive, thick, heavy, and far too rough. Indeed, it was a raw heap of iron. Such a weapon is unusable by men, as simple men would never be able to slay a dragon. Guts, however, is the only man capable of achieving that feat, and the dragon he shall slay is Satan himself, the red dragon of the Book of Revelation. Just as Guts enters the dark interior of the sea god and tore out his heart with his sword, he will enter the abyss and tear apart the idea of evil, the heart of darkness itself. The boat arc will become significant for the story, having served as a brilliant foreshadowing of the story's conclusion in retrospect. The design of the heart of the sea god is almost identical to that of the idea of evil. Guts will be able to slay the idea of evil because of his special sword. If he has wounded Griffith beforehand, one can imagine that the astral power of the Dragon Slayer will have become immeasurable. By defeating the Antichrist, the envoy and son of the evil god, his sword will acquire enough energy to even pierce the false god. Since the beginning of the story, Guts has possessed a Behelit. A Behelit is essentially a portal to the deepest parts of the astral plane, with the abyss being the foundation of that realm. Nearing the end of the story, Guts will finally be able to activate it, perhaps with the aid of Schierke's and/or Farnese's magic. And in an ultimate act of martyrdom, he will travel to the abyss and slay the Demiurge, believing he won't be able to come back from the darkness. It's possible that his body will be damaged or lost, though I don't think he will be transposed to the Berserker armor like Gaiseric was to the skeletal suit. He may become physically weaker, as has been foreshadowed, or partially paralyzed. The man who was once the strongest will then become weak in the flesh, but his spirit will shine brighter than ever. Either way, Guts will finally drop his sword and be able to live in peace with Casca and his son. Guts embodies human suffering. He is the supreme martyr of the world of Berserk, just as Christ is for ours, albeit imperfect, as all mortal men are. He is also the personification of the idea of fortune, both bad and good. From his very birth, Guts defied fate itself, and there are certain scenes that depict him as possessing a supernatural power over causality, going beyond those moments where Guts surpasses expectations and defeats an opponent who once seemed unbeatable. Before the Battle of Doldrey, Guts plays dice with his comrades from the Band of the Hawk, and wins 10 bets in a row, something completely implausible. More significant is that Guts survives the eclipse, during which his death was ordered by the God Hand itself. There's also a scene where Schierke asks Guts if he intends to challenge even angels and demons who have control over destiny, and he replies that, one day, he will strike them where it hurts. In other words, he will tear out their hearts, the idea of evil itself. Guts' fight against Bazuzo was also decided by sheer luck. He would have died if not for Bazuzo's axe breaking in that precise moment. The story will conclude with the dawn, the true dawn. The world was destroyed by an apocalyptic war, but it will have been an opportunity for its reconstruction, this time free from the influence of the evil god. In the past, Guts defeated Griffith at the moment the dawn broke, and this will be repeated in the future, before the eyes of all. Man wields the sword so that he may die smiling in some far-off time beyond perception. This section of the video will be dedicated to analysis that didn't fit into the main part. Adonis was, in fact, a bastard son. Julius, the king's brother, was having an affair with the queen and was plotting, much like in Hamlet, to usurp the throne. Julius raised him without a mother and trained him in the art of combat so that he could become a warrior king. Julius did not trust his brother to rule Midland, especially after Griffith's rise, a commoner. He saw the king as a weakling who could ruin the empire. Adonis' birth as the queen's bastard, which may have occurred in secret, since the queen had a network of secret agents inside the castle, fits the timeline. The mother of Princess Charlotte dies. The new queen marries the king, who remained in love with his former wife and did not give her proper attention. The new queen begins meeting with Julius, and so on. It is plausible that the king remained unaware of this possible conspiracy, since he was not close to the new queen and throughout the Golden Age showed little knowledge of any political developments in his castle. Griffith dismantles the conspiracy piece by piece while gaining the king's favor. He was the smartest player in the Game of Thrones. It's also possible that Julius didn't intend to conduct a direct coup, but merely planned for the future of the kingdom in advance, viewing Adonis as the inheritor of the throne who'd marry the princess, as the king didn't seem too interested in producing a male heir. However, the fact that the queen had an elaborate spy network, and that Julius was having an affair with the queen, and that his son does not seem to have a mother, all the while Julius showed contempt for the king's decisions and so on, may hint at something deeper. The final duel between Guts and Griffith will parallel Guts' fight against Mozgus at the Tower of Conviction. Everyone saw Guts as the opponent of the Angel, when in fact, the Angel was a demon. In the end, Guts defeated him and brought dawn to the world. The evil spirits that plagued the masses vanished alongside the dissipated darkness. Mozgus is not purely evil, but rather a man who embodies duality, the chaotic mixture of good and evil. Mozgus blindly adheres to the principle that suffering sanctifies man. He interprets this notion as meaning that he can and must torture as a form of penance all those who break the extreme dogma he preaches. As cruel and angry as he is, punishing the weak for the slightest mistake, he does have kindness at his core. He took under his wing the most deformed and miserable, giving them purpose. But the demiurge is the source of duality itself, and the demiurge is Satan. That is why Mozgus became a false angel, an iron angel, heavy, that is, the opposite of light, and destructive. His cube-shaped face alludes to the cubic nature, according to sacred geometry, of the prison of the flesh, the material world, and he acquired this facial structure by banging his head on the ground countless times as a form of prayer. It is no coincidence that he, like the demiurge, is a fool, a being blinded to the truth and trapped in dualism. The same applies to Farnese, who notably subverted the notion that suffering is a sanctifying force by flagellating herself for pleasure. The final blow that Guts will strike against the heart of evil is subtly foreshadowed by the scene in which Guts plummets, passing through a layer of abyssal beings, and pierces, with his sword, the heart of Mozgus, who parallels the demiurge itself. Guts will fall through the abyss, a dimension formed by corrupted souls, by corrupted ideas, like the demons that plagues the Tower of Conviction, and strike the heart of darkness with his sword. And just as everyone saw the false angel fall, everyone will watch the false god be destroyed. As previously explained, Mozgus parallels the demiurge, the blind and foolish false god, while his squad of torturers parallels the god hand. The members were recruited similarly to the fingers of the hand. All were people who experienced deep rejection, which led them to cultivate intense hatred in their hearts, until a demiurgic figure offers them ascension. The commander of the torturer group, a handsome man but allergic to light, symbolizes the Black Hawk, that is, Griffith, the commander of the God Hand, and this is also reflected in his crow-like attire. The egg of the perfect world encapsulates the chaotic logic of the demiurge. For the sake of a paradise on earth, he cultivated the cycle of violence and suffering so that the wheel would spin faster and faster, until it generated enough energy for the birth of the Antichrist. He created pseudo-apostles for both the satanic cult and for the Inquisition, so that both sides would destroy each other. As he himself said, "Here in the Holy Land, everything is flowing towards the expected moment. What I did was just gently push this development." The egg is like a subversion of Mary, Mother of Christ. He was born at the epicenter of sin and disgrace, and was shaped by misery, a scenario opposite to the Immaculate Conception of Mary. The egg grew up in a garden, as he himself calls it, a hellish garden of corpses. Mary in a garden free of human sin. And just as Mary gave birth to Christ, the egg will give birth to the Antichrist. However, he is not purely evil. He aims to create a perfect world so that no one will have to endure the suffering he went through. And for this greater good he is willing to sacrifice himself, as a martyr, a saint. But of course, such ambition is foolish, and he acted as a servant of Satan. His narrative, along with that of Mozgus and his torturers, and, on a macrocosmic scale, the God Hand itself, is a practical example of the popular saying, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." The egg resides in a demonic temple dedicated to an idol of the Antichrist, built from the skeletons and flayed skins of Christian monks, and modeled after the symbol of the Holy See's Hawk of Light, that is, the Christ of the world of Berserk. Nosferatu Zodd parallels Guts. He was likely a companion and rival of Gaiseric, a barbarian led by him in the great unifying war that resulted in the creation of Midland, just as Griffith led Guts in the Band of the Hawk. Therefore, the past relationship of Zodd, the perfect warrior of his time, and Gaiseric, a visionary general whose ambition was to be the king of the world, mirrors that of Guts and Griffith. Incidentally, Zodd became Griffith's right-hand man in his new Band of the Hawk, just as Guts was in the previous one. The centuries-long periods during which Zodd withdrew from the scene, only to later act as a wandering mercenary, seeking enemies who could match him in combat, serves as parallel to the time Guts left the Band of the Hawk to isolate himself from the world. reflect and train, and then wander in search of foes equal to him in battle. For this reason, the fight between Zodd and Guts in the Graveyard of Swords is especially symbolic. The greatest warrior in history faces the greatest warrior of the present. Zodd is like Guts if he had bowed down to darkness. The scene in which Griffith appears to Zodd and cuts one of his horns, taming him, parallels the scene where Griffith tames Guts by defeating him in a duel, dislocating one of his shoulders. In both cases, Griffith demonstrates physical superiority over the untamable beasts, who, admiring his strength, decides to follow him, according to the law of the jungle. It's worth noting that Satan is, allegorically, the primal energy of nature, the animalistic instinct of man. This is one of the meanings of the dragon, which must be conquered by the knight so that he can save, to claim for himself, the maiden, that is, the virgin. This classic archetypal story represents, esoterically, man taming his inner animal, the place responsible for sinful desire, and becoming worthy of a pure woman. Zodd and Guts are representations of the demon itself. Guts, at the beginning of the Golden Age, had a sheath models to look like a demon's tail, and Zodd, more obviously, transforms into a beast with goat legs, a tail and dragon or bat wings and demon horns. In this allegory, Griffith represents the ideal knight, the accomplished and Christian man worthy of the maiden's heart, who, in Griffith's case, is not just any maiden, but the princess herself. Finally, I will theorize about the three members of the God Hand that I have not yet spoken about. It is important, to understand this part of the video, to keep in mind the formula behind the demonic bargain in Berserk. To ascend to demonhood, a person must love in order to be able to sacrifice. The members of the God Hand are exceptional individuals who were offered such a bargain. Their energy, stemming from love and suffering, from powerful overall emotion, gave them the chance to become not ordinary apostles, but archdemons. Therefore, their origin stories will be like expanded versions compared to those of common demons, as we see with Griffith. The order in which I organized the following theories is relevant. I decided it based on the chronological sequence relative to their eclipses. And, to conclude this introduction, it is important to emphasize that all members of the God Hand have a role to play in the coming of the Antichrist, and this may help us theorize each of their stories. For example, as I have already explained, Void took responsibility for organizing the system. In life, he founded, led, and organized the Holy See, and as an archdemon, he founded, led, and organized the God Hand, setting in motion the plan for the creation of the Antichrist and his paradise on earth. As is above, so is below. To this end, he created the red Behelits to recruit other fingers of the hand, and the green ones to recruit apostles. It is no coincidence that the brand of sacrifice, which is a clear allusion to the mark of the beast from the Book of Revelation, is like an inverted version of the symbol of the Hawk of Light, the Christ prophesied by the Holy See. Slan, in life, was a nun marked by an intense and contradictory relationship with her sacred duty and pleasure. She embraced the sick and the wounded, sincerely caring for them like a mother. Her heart was full of compassion. However, she later developed the habit of giving her body to them, and she indulged in the act, which was mediated by suffering. Sometimes, the sick was dying in the act, and that gratified her even more. Hence the abrupt ending of the mysterious ancient story that has been recorded through the ages. The old man rotting by the roadside rejected the nun's warmth in his final moments. And what I believe happened is that the nun ruins the man's sublime departure, or she developed a morbid curiosity based on what the man has told her, and started to give herself to the sick. Her role as a nun, a chaste woman, symbolically married to Christ, was then completely subverted. She organized a satanic cult and corrupted other nuns, with the goal of creating a kind of garden of delights. She and her colleagues seduced men to recruit them and together form an endless harem in their convents. The narrative of the characters Nina and Joachim in the Conviction arc, the same arc in which Mozgus recounts the nun's tale, serves, in part, as a mirror to Slan's story. A man who was in love with her, who had been recruited by her, ended up betraying her to the church, and her cult was persecuted and captured by the Holy See's army. After this event, during her torture, her Behelit called to her, and she sacrificed her cult to become a member of the God Hand. As an archdemon, Slan took responsibility for creating the satanic cult of the Holy Land, which mirrors the cult she had founded in life. The existence of the cult justifies the growing inquisitions, which, in turn, caused more suffering and harmed innocents along with the guilty. And the suffering drove more people to seek relief. That is, it serves to attract them to the satanic cult. Slan is worshipped by sinners as the goddess of fire, for she appears to them in bonfires to enchant the smoke they produce with hallucinogenic magic, whose purpose is to exponentially enhance the sensory experience of the flesh. The chapter in which Nina takes Joachim to the cult is called The Bowels of the Holy Land, and Slan manifests in the material world through troll guts. The title of this chapter may have a double meaning, referring both to the current cults that Slan created as a finger of the God Hand, and to the one she led in life. Conrad was possibly a doctor who aspires to attain mastery over the boundaries between life and death. He sought, in a profane way, to create carnal immortality, to free everyone from death, a subversion of the Christian idea of eternal life in paradise. His name, Conrad, means wise counselor. Perhaps he was a figure of some prestige, a member of the clergy, which would also explain how easily Conrad obtained corpses to dissect. After all, cemeteries would be managed by the church, and the clergyman would have the financial means to bribe gravediggers and other servants. Under this hypothesis, he likely lives during a time of pestilence, such as that of the Black Death, and has to care for countless sick people, watching them die in their beds. He could also have studied the corpses of the very patients who died under his care. His methods were extremely controversial, taboo for the time in the very religious cultural context. Even so, he had managed to assemble a team of pioneers to assist him in his benevolent research. It is possible that he and his companions were caught during a study session, examining corpses, and as consequence were accused of witchcraft. Conrad was then sentenced to execution, and during his final moments, decided to sacrifice his collaborators. Like the other members of the God Hand, Conrad sincerely sought, through his medical and scientific research, the greater good, even if the goal was foolish and materialistic, and like them, in the end, he did not care about the means to achieve that end. For an eclipse to occur, as says the prophecy, the sun must die, and the sun is a celestial body of pure light that, during the eclipse, becomes pure darkness. Evil is a corruptive force. It is no coincidence that the name Griffith, the name of the Antichrist, derives from Griffon, a fantastical beast that combines two symbols of the sun, the falcon and the lion. Just like Griffith, who was, as stated in the chapter titled Bonfire of Dreams, a great flame that warmed his followers, a messianic figure, the other fingers of the hand also held leadership roles and an expansive mission. After all, to become archdemons, they had to sacrifice a vast group of loyal subordinates. Conrad's appearance is modeled after the babies depicted in a work by H.R. Geiger, one of Miura's greatest artistic influences. This may also subtly allude to the idea of eternal life. Conrad is like a baby, having transcended death and obtained an ironic look that refers to a disturbed, exaggerated idea of eternal youth. As an archdemon, Conrad was responsible for the spread of the Black Plague, which serves to cause a massive exodus to the Holy Land, so that the strugglers would become part of the ecosystem that would produce the Antichrist after a climactic ritual of mass sacrifice, Ordo ab Chao. Ubik, like Conrad, was a wise man. Both share the role of manipulators. They disguised themselves as a pair, as an elderly lady to convince Griffith to sacrifice the Band of the Hawk. Besides this, both have clenched hands, subtly implying their role as bargainers. He is constantly smiling, as someone who has developed the habit of disguising esoteric intrigues, besides being extremely talkative. His eyes are covered by dark lenses, and along with the marks on his face, it's as if he were wearing glasses, a luxury that only figures of prestige could possess in the time of Berserk. What I find most likely is that Ubik was, in life, a religious figure, a priest, a missionary, a holy man, and, given that he received a red Behelit, a special Behelit reserved for those who will become archdemons, his ambition must have been particularly powerful. In other words, he aspires to become pontiff, and for this purpose, he lies to his colleagues and conspired against his rivals within the church. Through his schemes, Ubik became pontiff of the Holy See. His ultimate ambition was to exterminate the enemies of the church and end paganism through forced conversion, or, as a last resort, execution. The glasses on his face might seem like an insignificant detail, but they could be a major clue to Ubik's nature. After all, it was a man of God who invented glasses, and it's possible that in the world of Berserk, it was Ubik himself. We don't see a single other character wearing glasses throughout the entire story. Furthermore, his lenses are black, implying that he sees the world through darkness, the inversion of the pure and sacred perspective that a pontiff should have. Another factor that might be overlooked at first glance, but carries meaning, is his habits of restless floating. This behavior pattern can derive, in a satirical, subversive, and symbolic way, from his former role as pontiff. After all, men of God should possess a light soul, and thus it's common for Jesus Christ and other sacred figures to be depicted levitating. The fins he has in place of feet reference the sacred symbol of the fish, which represents both Jesus Christ, who was like a fish swimming through the abyss that is the material world, and the Pope himself, whose hat is designed to emulate the shape of a fish's head. Saint Peter, the first Pope, was a fisherman, and to this day, popes wear on the ring finger a piece called the fisherman's ring, in his honor. The symbolism of the fish in the design of Ubik is no coincidence. He is a Pope turned archdemon. As a final comment about Ubik's appearance, I will mention that when manifested in the form of black matter in the Conviction arc, Ubik took the shape of a round, winged angel. Ubik was a central figure in the inquisitorial campaigns against witches. He led the expedition that resulted in the rot of the Spirit's Tree, as mentioned by Schierke, an event that occurred about 200 years before the present story, precisely at the time an eclipse was scheduled to happen. Molda also recounted a war between the witches and a great continental nation. That nation was, of course, Midland. Ubik had sworn to end witchcraft, and for this, he summons the army of the Holy See. His dream likely originated from a good place. Along the way, however, he became as corrupt as those he hunted. The witches confronted the army with black magic. Molda also says the enemies were sacrificed and turned into wicker men. All the death and suffering caused by the war on both sides corrupted the Spirit's Tree. In the past, Flora traveled from village to village helping people with magic. One of the main battlefields of the Holy War was a certain village near the forest where the Spirit's Tree resided. That is, a place very close to Flora's home, now known as Enoch Village. The village is particularly strict in its faith, and in the present day, we see Schierke saving it with her magic. I believe this sequence partly serves as a mirror to that past event. The priest who repressed Schierke is to her as Ubik was to Flora. And finally, it can be concluded that Ubik's original name was Enoch, a name derived from a biblical figure who walked with God and was taken by him to heaven, just as Ubik was taken to the false heaven, to the eclipse, by Void. Like the biblical Enoch, he ascended, but to the position of archdemon. The village was named Enoch because he was seen as a saint who perished in the war against paganism, having been killed by a witch, Flora. Enoch was defeated by Flora and sacrificed his army to become a member of the God-hand, their fight having taken place in the village. Ubik's persecution caused Flora to become isolated. It forced her to hide from the world. She felt guilty for having attracted the Inquisition to the village of Enoch, for causing the torture and death of so many people because of her intervention. As an archdemon, Ubik likely acted as an oracle, sending the people of Midlands the prophecy of the birth of the Hawk of Light through dreams, an event that was interpreted as a miracle. Ubik's name comes from a novel by Philip K. Dick, and it was chosen, most definitely, in reference to the man with mental powers, precognitive abilities, thus, his direct connection with the prophecy that was injected into men's dreams. And this is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to support my work and get access to a Substack-like blog in which I post in-depth analysis of works of an esoteric nature, ranging from movies to manga to music clips, as well as my insights on philosophy and religion, you can check out my Patreon.